Welcome back to Paper Mountains Podcast. Today we are joined with a truly remarkable guest, an actor, a storyteller, and an adventurer. He is here to talk about his new book, A Line in the Sand, of which was co-authored with Miles Spencer. This historical fiction novel was inspired from their trek through the Middle East, drawn from the legacy of the legendary T.E. Lawrence. But before we dive in, if you or someone you know has an inspiring story or project and would like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Just please reach out through the contact details below. And this episode has a little something for everyone: adventure seekers, history buffs, and curious minds. We discuss everything from skydiving in Antarctica to cold nights in the Saudi desert. Our guest shares how this 2006 expedition transformed his views on identity, purpose, and global understanding. After this conversation, I highly encourage you to go pick up A Line in the Sand to dive deeper into this history through a thrilling lens. You'll find all of the links below in the show notes. Now, without further ado, please welcome Wells Jones. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. This is fantastic.
For sure.
It's great.
No.
I enjoy your podcast.
Thank you.
A little bit that I know, and I, there's some great people you've had. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
stories.
Yeah.
And your story with your wife, that's beautiful.
It's still happening, right? The story's still unfolding.
You are at the beginning in some phases, right? With a child, correct?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful.
Oh yeah, we're excited. Life's awesome, so can't complain about anything.
Yeah, good on you, man.
Well, let's get this thing going. To start things off, I finished the book end of last week. Yes, sir.
I've got to congratulate you. Thank you. That's very, very kind of you. Now, I don't know what you think about it, but
it's a fun book, and I truthfully mean that. It was a fun experience, and just with the whole process of how it unfolded as well, of you reaching out and then us having that conversation, and no, otherwise I would have probably not discovered the book, and
right.
And it's been fun to go down that path, and it's a fun book, and yeah, I enjoyed the story unfold. Yes.
Did you learn?
Oh my gosh.
Did you get a sense of something that you didn't know about?
Yes.
Like the history.
Everything was essentially new to me. So much of the past history in the Middle East, I might be exposing myself but I was definitely ignorant to it. And when I find out things like these, a part of me gets a little obsessive, and I'll go down rabbit holes. And so that reading the book has led me to looking at as I was reading and taking notes, I would go to the maps and look at the geography and try to familiarize myself with it, so that way I could understand the location.
Good.
Then I was reading about T.E. Lawrence, and it was a name in passing that I was familiar with, but never really looked into it. So I was reading about the history, reading about the Arab Revolt, and then I ended up watching the Lawrence of Arabia 1962 film.
Did you watch it?
Yes, yeah.
Wasn't it spectacular?
It's incredible.
Isn't it? Spectacular.
Yeah, it's an amazing film. It's a feat for 1962 release. It everything still holds up, and then the cultural relevance that is still here today, and it sounds like some of the justification that brought you the creativity to release this book. It's incredible. So thank you for that.
The movie got us all going. Got you going. I mean, it added to having read our book, which is fabulous that you did that. But the movie was such inspiration. I was an actor at the time, and I thought, oh my God, I want to be him. And I'm thinking, I want to be Peter O'Toole, in the movie. And then I started looking at who T.E. Lawrence really was. He's 5'5.5".
Okay.
And when I read that, I just said, there's no way I can authentically do this. And when I met up with Miles years later, and he asked me did I know anything about T.E. Lawrence? Had I read Seven Pillars of Wisdom? Yes. I was going to play him in a one-man show that I was putting together. And I stopped. He said, why? I said, because I'm not 5'5.5". Get a bigger chair to do it on stage. But anyway, we'll talk maybe a little more about how that came into being. But yeah, I'm happy you read the book. And that's exactly what happens with me. When I get a script, like I was in a television series called Manhattan. I played Major Pellegrin, So he was part of the Army side of the Manhattan Project, which is Los Alamos. Now, Los Alamos is 20 some odd miles from Santa Fe, which is where I live. And so this was talk about rabbit holes to get into. Before Oppenheimer, the movie came out, which blew me away. I don't know if you've seen Oppenheimer.
Sir. Yeah, beautiful movie.
Well, I'll tell you, the same with any role that I get, the fun is the pre-preparation. Even with the trek going into the Middle East, the book is based on a 2006 trek. Now, 2006 was a very different world than it is today. It was right after 9/11, and being there, the Saudis were like, why are you here? We never expected we would ever see another American because of those those terrorists. You've got the Ku Klux Klan. We have these wacos.
Yeah.
This. We'll get more into that. But the rabbit holes and the research, I'm so glad that the book led you to go deeper, because to understand a people, you have to understand their history.
For sure. And that's with everything. And it doesn't matter what leads you to grow a better understanding of the culture or people around you. And it's incredible that your book that you co-authored with Miles can be a resource for people to learn more and also have a fun experience along the way. So it's a win-win.
Well, that's great. I do, in case we need it, I have 2 different passages from the book that I would like to read, perhaps within the context of this, if it works.
Incredible. Yeah, for sure.
Just to bring a context to what we're talking about.
Yeah, incredible.
Little teasers.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever you feel comfortable, if you feel like it fits to bring up organically, feel free to bring up whenever you want in the conversation. If there's a certain point where we want to break it and read an excerpt, that's fine as well. Okay? Good. All right. So I have some of his questions outlined in preparation. I think we're going to do a little bit of weaving, and that's somewhat intentional to kind of maybe go back and forth in between you and the book and the story. So
in conversation with you.
Yes, sir. So
it's a 3-way.
100%.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So let's learn more about you, Wells. If you want to, in some capacity, how would you define yourself, explain yourself? Who is Wells Jones?
Who is Wells Jones? I don't know. I come from an Army family. If I just go, I was born in Stuttgart, Germany. And my brother, a year later, was born in Stuttgart. My father was an officer in the Army. And I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters. And so we were on Army bases. We ended up in South Carolina, as they say in South Carolina, Gurnville, South Carolina. Did you get that?
I honestly don't know if I could spell it out.
Well, you're right. Phonetically, it would be a lot of mumbling. Anyway, it was a Southern accent, and that's where we lived in South Carolina for a while. 1960, 64. I started first grade. All my siblings were in different levels of school or preschool. We ended up in Vermont in 1964. My father got an executive position at Killington in the ski industry, and that was very new. And Killington now is a big one for the East, like Mammoth and many other places in the West, and Aspen and so forth, Vail in the mid in Colorado. But so it was magnificent moving to Vermont. It was scary. It was mountains. It was green. And we arrived in the fall, and the homes or the places where we were, because my father was working at Killington, was driving along the access road to Killington, and there were all these strange shaped homes. And they said, "What is that?" And someone that was with us said, "That's called a chalet." I said, "A chalet?" It's like, "Is it foreign?" She said, "It's like a Swiss chalet." I said, "I love it." And what's that? That's an A-frame. An A-frame, these are all homes, And she said, yes, this is what people do in ski areas. And at the ski areas at Killington, they have chalets, and that's a real sell there. And the A-frames to keep the snow falling off, the amount of snow. I said, is there a lot of snow? Yes, there is. Like a lot of snow, like more than 3 inches. Just like, Anyway, went through school in Vermont, did normal high school things. In a way, it was on a much smaller scale. It was a 5-town union high school. My graduating class was 31. So it was very rural, but I did have a chance to do skiing, and I started working very early in a ski shop at 13 with my brother, fitting skis, rental skis to people that came in for rental skis. And this is back in, quite a while ago. And decided that I wanted to join the Navy instead of going to school. The year was 1973. The war was wrapping up in Vietnam. But more importantly, I needed to get out of Vermont. I needed to get away. I knew there was a much bigger world, and it was not Vermont, and it wasn't New York. It was, I needed to go far away and explore. And as it worked out, I was assigned after all my training.
Sorry, so when you signed up for the Navy, is that because you saw that as a tool for that?
That's an absolute tool. It was an out.
Okay.
It was an out. Dartmouth was very close. Actually, the head of the Dartmouth theater department, Rod Alexander, at the time, was our graduation speaker. And he's a very cultured, a very cultured man. And he was giving an address to a very rural group of students and families that were listening. Some of the things he said were just over the top, but for me, it was, that's what I want. I want his ability to speak, to do something, to be something with, like what he was saying as you move on from graduation. So I'd already joined the Navy, and it just was a stroke of genius and good luck, because I was assigned to a squadron, VXE6, that had been flying planes, the ski-equipped C-130 Hercules aircraft and twin jet engine helicopters around Antarctica, working for the National Science Foundation, flying scientists around Antarctica. The staging base was Christchurch, New Zealand. It was one glorious moment after another. Once I was a part of the group, they had a pararescue team. It took me 6 months to become a member. I passed. And so I went down to the ice for the first time in 1974-75 season as a member of the pararescue team, which gave me big purpose, which was spectacular.
When you say go down to the ice, what do you mean?
The ice is, Antarctica, of course, is the southern hemisphere. And the ice is another word for Antarctica.
Okay.
When you say the ice. And so going to the ice and landing in McMurdo. You see, McMurdo is the epicenter of activity. It's where the National Science Foundation is set up, where the most numbers of people go through that are research scientists, people from all different institutes around the world. They're Danes, French, German, you name it. They go through McMurdo, and from McMurdo, they're flown to outlying stations, including South Pole, to do their research, whether they're doing a core sample in the ice to see, through the, hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many, tens of thousands of years, what was happening by a core sample, to kind of solve, even back then in the 70s, the common cold, people trying to figure that out. But there were also teams going into an active volcano. And it was a very exciting time for a young man like myself, and being on the rescue team and being trained to do mountain rescue, going up and down with sleds, with bodies, simulated bodies, working, learning how to set up lines to haul things, to get in and out of crevasses, and then how to actually survive the extreme cold. So I did the training and ultimately became a survival instructor that I was teaching the air crew and personnel what to do if during a plane crash. We would call them mishaps instead of crashes. And we were averaging over 1.5 per year of something going awry. And it did happen. And rescues were necessary. But there were no fatalities, fortunately, but definitely messed up planes. Got out of there. I wanted to stay in the Navy. I loved it, but my eyes are not good. And I was 6'3", and back then there were 2 marks against me to fly jets, and that's what I wanted, because I looked at the pilots that were in our group were people that didn't make it to jet school, but they talked about it, and I heard stories about it. And I said, that's what I want, to fly jets, land on an aircraft carrier, to have that kind of consciousness and knowledge to do that. At any rate, before I got out of there on January 1977, the team did a parachute jump, a skydive, free fall over the South Pole. This is the 4th time that a plane had dropped parachutists. I'm number 7, not on that flight, but in total of the number of people that have skydived the South Pole. 20 years later was the next time some guy, it turned out they were all guys, 6, and 3 within the 6 died. They didn't handle the cold, and there were complications in their free fall. So from there on to acting school, went through acting school, did very well at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. I had done some acting in high school, and I liked it. And I thought, with the encouragement of my mother, and she said, don't ever tell anyone that your mother said go to acting school. But yes, I support you going to acting school because you're good. You're good at it. And so I thought, okay, I'll do that. And it worked out very well. After graduating from the acting school, I got my equity card, I got my SAG and AFTRA card from doing commercials. My first commercial was a Kodak commercial. I was told by my agent, now look, you're going to do 40 auditions, you're going to get 20 auditions, you get 1 call back, 40, you will get booked. So you're going to have to do about 4, just be prepared, 40 auditions, you'll get some callbacks, but to book it, because the competition was so high, well, whatever it was, I was in the groove, and I was booking. That was my 4th audition. Nice. And from that, it was fantastic. I was just in Florida, and I was saying, we got to go to the market. I said, okay, great. Just, what's the GPS? We got to the market. I said, public supermarket. I said, oh man, I did a public supermarket commercial way back when that carried me through 3 years of doing, I was part of it, of doing theater in New York, doing 1 commercial, because you get paid residuals. Back then you did. You'd have your friends and say, okay, it wasn't just for public, but for Kodak or Stroh's beer. You probably don't know Stroh's was a beer. Molson's, Molson's beer?
I can't say I do.
But I did beer commercials. All I had a beer commercial. And they were the ones, because you get $100 a pop, basically, every time it's shown. But you had to make sure that everybody was watching the 3 television stations that they were on, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And then Fox became a part of it, shortly after. There wasn't this mass streaming platforms and networks. So doing commercials helped me do theater in New York. I loved it, and I couldn't support my family doing theater.
And how old were you at this time?
Oh, I must be 30.
Okay.
30. And I had been married at the American Academy and had a child, 2 boys. And then we divorced, separated. She went to California. I stayed in New York, and we're great friends still. And then I remarried a little while after, a couple of years later, and was married with a very dynamic, wonderful woman for 29 years.
Congrats, awesome.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And we formed a production company because we realized she had also gone to the American Academy. So we took the knowledge of how to work with scripts And it's kind of the Aristotle's Poetics talks about how writing and you have a beginning, middle, and end. And we realized we could put that into producing events. And so it just happened that we were tapped on the shoulder to direct a Lincoln Center show. In Avery Fisher Hall was a jazz show. And I mean, it was a jazz show with Lionel, I mean, big, big names. It was a Christmas show. It's called the Jazz Nativity. It was fabulously exciting and full of icon jazz musicians, and many of them have passed on since because this is the 90s. And but it led to directing and producing together and being given wonderful advantages and opportunities. Kennedy Center, Lincoln Center, Orchestra Hall, Chicago, places in LA, St. Louis, directing not just that show, but working primarily, we ended up working for a nonprofit out of DC that saw us doing this work, doing in successful events for them. It was like fundraisers, but it was involving the children that were a part of their foundation. The foundation was set up for putting them on stage and presenting them so that the donors gave money to support the foundation.
Okay.
Without getting into the names of the foundation and stuff like that. But eventually I was offered to run that foundation, not just do their events, to be the chief operating officer. We took it on, so moved from the New York area to Chevy Chase, Maryland, 4 years in DC. It was very challenging. I'm in an office right now, but my life, my head is out there. You know, it's not in a chair at all. But I did run the foundation. It was great. And then I said enough. And we talked with each other, my wife and I. We can go anywhere we want. We'll sell this house. And we sold it for so much. It was just perfect. And we said, let's go to Golden, Colorado. Her brother lived there, and it's got the mountains. It was like, yeah. Well, I was about 30 pounds heavier. And I said, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run. I swear, I promise, every day. I'm going to run. I'm going to lose weight. And they call them 14ers. I know nothing about it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get up those mountains. She said, I'll come with you, you know. And we had kids as well. So we always have children involved, schools involved, summer camps involved. But we did get to Colorado. And before we got to Colorado, I met up with Miles Spencer.
This is where you met him?
No, I actually met him before, and it was in Connecticut. We met at church, at a church, and we had worked together. We worked together on his show called Money Hunt. Money Hunt was a PBS. It's kind of like the first reality show, business show. Two guys, Miles and a lawyer, would interview two companies that had been vetted, because we were looking to invest in companies. This is in the 90s, late 90s. And we would have a guest mentor. The guest mentor would be someone like, the second show was Jerry Yang from Yahoo, who was the founder of Yahoo. And we had many, many different hot shots would be the mentor. And they would be the king, the overall judge on whether the company that's pitching their business plan deserves the funds that they're asking for it. And it's all done on TV. You could watch a show and learn about business, learn about what's hot, what's not. And it was during the tech boom of the late 90s. It was fabulous. We're on our way to doing shows in Spain and Germany and France and England, setting up models to do the versions there when the whole .com blew up. And so that was the end of that. That's when I went to DC.
Understood.
I was offered a job to DC. So business was good. And so after the chief operating officer job in DC, which was fabulous. I mean, it was right after 9/11. We actually arrived on Friday before 9/11. The chairman of the board that hired me at this place was Colin Powell's wife, the former Secretary of Education, the former, Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell. And the board was made up of current cabinet members' wives. It was a very high-profile organization, and the events were very important, and that's the events that we were doing. Hence, I was hired as a chief operating officer. But it was the Friday before, arriving with the trucks outside the house. I started work on Monday, and Tuesday morning coming in was 9/11. And it started with scream from the first person that I had hired, whose father was the Admiral Todashek, who was the head of the Naval Reserves, and his office was in the Pentagon, and he was in the section that was hit, that was on fire. He and his staff got out, but it was one horrible disappointment after another. Mm-hmm. My boss was on the phone with Alma and saying, "Where's Colin?" He was flying. My boss's husband is a former Secretary of Education and drug czar, and everyone, including him, was saying, "Where the hell is George Bush?" He was out. He was, teaching at a kindergarten school or elementary school, visiting it. And then they hauled him to a secret place, but he didn't come back to DC right off. At any rate, it was a horrific time. You read about what we said about 9/11 in the book, and the story about the driver that was drinking and his confession that two of the terrorists were from his village.
Yeah.
As a side note, I want to say within the book that we found that people were very welcoming to Miles and I when we were there on the trek, and they wanted to prove that they weren't all terrorists. So Miles, finishing up with that foundation, and on the way to Golden, I stopped to see Miles because I'd been out, we had been in touch, but we hadn't done anything together for 4 years. And the first thing he asked me, he said, "Hey, do you know anything about T.E. Lawrence?" I said, "Yes." Did you ever read Seven Pillars of Wisdom? I said, "Yes." I was going to do a one-man show and went through the story of one-man show. He said, "That's perfect. That's exactly what I want to do. You can be Lawrence of Arabia. We'll go to universities. We'll bring him back to stage on live, and we'll show," this is in 2005, "we'll show the history. He'll talk about the history of where he's from and comment on what's going on today. We'll come up with a show around this." That's great, but it's not me to play. "Why?" I said, "He was 5'5.5". He said, "So what? Get a chair, big one." So that was his thing. It evolved into, we found a Broadway producer. We were introduced through a friend to a Broadway producer that had won so many Tony Awards, and she's a known quantity. We're still working with her. We've been through 4 writers to get a script. It's gone from everything about Lawrence to now it's centered, the play is called Dinner at the Majestic. It was called A Line in the Sand, like the book. It's called Dinner at the Majestic, and it centers on one day in the life of Gertrude Bell, who is at the Paris Peace Conference with Lawrence and Amir Faisal, trying to reverse the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is the agreement that divided the Middle East in 1917, even before the war was over, that has caused so much problems. It's been the foundation of a lot of the problems in the Middle East because of how the British and the French divided the place up. So we said, if we're going to do this play, and it's almost like we finished each other's words, we've got to go there. We started reading vociferously everything Lawrence, Wilson's, Max, Brown's, letters, anything we could get our hands on from July of 2005 until we went in the spring of 2006 on the trek. We trained for it physically. We were aware that we wanted to go under the wire. And so we did get, the physical training was just rucking. Do you know what rucking is? You put weights in a ruck, it doesn't matter. You put
Okay.
weight, in a rucksack, in
Oh
a
yeah.
sack. It's on your back. And you just do anything it builds your strength, your core strength and so forth. And we decided we would follow T.E. Lawrence's path during the Arab Revolt, which is basically Jeddah.
Can
So, yep.
before we go into that, I'm it sparks some curiosity, and this you guys come to this conclusion, and I'm curious. Was there a hard mental hurdle to get yourself to do this after having experienced that in DC in 9/11, and kind of, you mean, the effects were very close to you personally to see the outcomes of that, and then just a short 5 years later, was that a mental hurdle to get over, or were you, after reading more about it, were you just so excited that what, how much was 9/11 in your mind about going here, and then how did that affect your decision and play out of going there?
It was the reason for going there.
Okay.
It was coupled with a Westerner's understanding of the Middle East, which was Lawrence. And there were conflicts back then and conflicts that happened immediately after World War I. So his understanding of all the peoples, the cultures, Kurds, the Muslims, the Jews that were coming in, into what's now Israel through the Balfour Declaration, setting up a homeland in Palestine for the Jewish people. The headlines were so horrific, and the sense of retribution so overwhelmed. I had friends that died in the tower. And it always wells up sadness and grief. But on a bigger picture, for the 3,000, however many exact it was, and it's noted in the book, the numbers that have been killed in retribution is just staggering. And the same thing is happening today. So first, we went to see if the shock and awe and the headlines and what my electrician on my house in Golden that I was working on, I've always worked redoing homes. It's a great talent that I have, that I can do that. And when it comes time to sell, we just always do very well. And the electrician found out that I was going to Saudi Arabia once we decided, and I was training. He said, "Yeah, man, go get him." What do you mean? He said, "Look, I'll tell you what I do. I get pumpkins and I wrap towels around the heads, and I got a shotgun and I just light them up and I just go, Arab, Arab, Arab." And there was that feeling. There was that feeling that anyone with a dark skin that looked, like a Muslim, they were targets. And it just didn't make sense that that's the way it was. So we wanted to see with our own eyes, put our feet in the sand, and use Lawrence's path because it's clear. It gave us direction. We found a travel company that would set us up with drivers between places. The drivers didn't know the other drivers. The rules were very strict that we gave this R. Caruso and Company travel agency, that this is what we're looking for. Can you do it? And they did. If they brought us to a border crossing, they put us before the border crossing and turned around and went back. And when on the other side of the border crossing, we would have a vehicle meeting for us. And it wasn't an SUV. It was like local people that were hired to take us very in unassuming ways from point A to point B. I don't have the exact translation in Arabic, but we would say that when we would hear, "Why you here? Who you? Why you here?" People that couldn't speak English, but they knew a little bit. And we would say, da 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 da, to see with our own eyes. And they would say, "Consultants," because we looked like consultants. And the consultants are Blackwater, Triple Canopy, Centurion. They call them mercenary groups, but the groups that are private contractors to assist anyone that can pay the price for protection. to get from Amman, Jordan to Baghdad, or move around the country, bodyguards. And we would say, no, 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 no. Entertainment. Entertainment. We were thinking play, we were thinking anything to just soften, to leave us alone. And they basically did.
I mean, it's so hard for me to compare myself in your shoes because I'm so much younger. And the effect of 9/11 didn't grasp on me being in elementary. I mean, everybody around shown how horrible it was and that this was happening. But, somebody who was my age had no context or understanding. And even the older, like you said, there's adults who had no context and understanding of the time. And it led to a Westerner's misconception or leading to people to have ignorant hatred towards somebody across the world unknowingly. And you were able to get through that mess and go with an open mind, and that's amazing.
It was like kayak for a cause. I didn't really get into that, where it was, the model was to inspire people to action to raise money. So it was used by paddling in a kayak across Long Island Sound, and then getting transported back, and the money that you raised, and your pod of 10 kayaks that you 10 raise along with however many other people, we're going to write checks to local charities, and we're going to have one heck of a party on the beach. And we're going to bring in the Whalers, we're going to bring in the Neville Brothers, or we'll bring in Dickie Betts and the Great Southern, we'll bring in Donovan Frankenreiter, we'll bring in a band or a group, and we'll have local people, and we'll have a lovely party and bring the charities up on stage and give them a check. Well, we worked up to a Guinness record of 313 sea kayaks launched at once. It wasn't all at once, but in the morning, going 14 miles across Long Island Sound, raising money for the event, and writing 5 checks of $50,000 each to 5 charities. Adventure with purpose. This, going to the Middle East, we did the same thing. We raised money by saying, we're going to go. Of course, people went, whoa. Some guys were going, wow, man, that's pretty intense. Yeah, well, we're going to go, and we need money. And we're going to give a portion of that money to a group called Seeds of Peace. In the book, we call it Seeds of Hope. But the real organization is still around. They had their camp this last summer. It's where Israeli and Palestinian kids get together, high school, thought leaders, get together for the summer and work out conflict resolution, work through it. They're guided through it. They tell their stories. They all swear, I'm not going to be like my mom. I'm not going to be like my dad. And the first thing that happens when there's conflict, the words come flying out. They've heard growing up with all their life. They learn to separate themselves and to have their own thought about peace. So we raised the money to go to find out for ourselves and to bring back the information of what we saw, and the similarities between the cultures, between us and them, there are more similarities than differences.
Yeah. With I can attest from the places I've been around the world, it's everywhere. There's
commonalities.
Yeah.
The commonalities. Food, music, home, family, love, needs, water, food, and then sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been any place where someone said, get out.
Yeah.
We were, and also part of our training, and one of the first things that our SAS trainer that trained Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman just a year and a half before us, and they did the long way around was the first motorcycle trip that they did, but they realized they needed to understand the areas that they were going into and what to expect. So you hire someone to do it. Well, it turned out that we got the same guy. It wasn't because of them. It's just that it happened to be that he told us that he had just been with Ewan McGregor and Borman.
And how long
And
did that training? How long were you training?
the training ended up being, I think, well, it was even like Skype. We did it. He was in London. He was a private secretary to the Queen of England. He had just gotten the position, and he was in charge of Prince Harry and Prince William's security. And he had been a SAS major with the Irish Guard, and he knew all about checkpoints, all about these countries, and he filled us in like you get kidnapped in Saudi Arabia, the percentages of getting out alive are very small. You get kidnapped in Jordan, you just won't get kidnapped in Jordan. Jordan's very peaceful. They're more like the United States. So it's a really wonderful country. Syria, you got to watch out. You know, there's volatile things going on in Syria, but it's Saudi. It turned out that Jordan was the one that a week before, one of the hotels that we were going to be in was bombed by terrorists. The week before we went, it was like, okay, what do we do here? And it was like we decided we're going. We're going to go to the same place.
Yeah.
We want to see it. We want to see what it looks like. Shattered windows. You know, I mean, it's not like wanting to see 9/11, but it's like see proof. See, if someone's angry, I want to see it. We saw it. We did see anger, fight, plot, anger. The same kind of anger that must have been in those people on October 7th, 2023.
Yeah.
And hatred. It's not someone giving you the finger for cutting them off on the road. We're talking about something that wants to just is just so different. And you feel it. You can carve it with a knife, the atmosphere, when you walk into it. And we were aware of that, you know, in some cases in our travel. But so going to the Middle East, we accepted it. We did raise the money. We got all the money we need. We gave money to the Seeds of Peace. They loved it. We met with Janet Wallach, whose husband started Seeds of Peace. It goes back to Clinton era, and it was just wonderful to be a part of something with purpose, and going with purpose, and coming back. And we thought this is going to help our play. And we thought, yeah, we want to write a book. This is 2006.
Can I pause you for a second on you finding purpose in your life in this experience? I'm seeing a trend with your choices of things that you focus on. It seems like you've always been trying to focus on, not just with going to the Middle East in 2006, of finding purpose. You found purpose in the U.S. Navy and then the acting school. And then it seems like when you took on the nonprofit organization and giving back to kids, you were providing the purpose for kids who were aspiring actors and playwrights, and you're providing that in that sense. And it's a reoccurring theme across the board, and it's very cool to see and inspiring to see someone living out in execution with purpose. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point of it all, I think, is to find that purpose within life and execute on it. And you're the living experience of it.
Well, thank you for saying that. I've been concerned that, you know, the bank account isn't so loaded with the history, not of purpose, but of work.
Yeah. I
have never, and my wife for so long, we never saw it as work. We saw it as it was an adventure. It was like, whew, can you believe this? Now we're going to direct at the Kennedy Center? No, it wasn't without levels of fear and levels to need to overcome in organizing and having the capability to express a vision, like for a big event where James Earl Jones, I don't know if you know James Earl Jones, but he was the co-host. Yeah. He was the host. And we have just fabulous people on stage. And then the kids performing, costume and stuff. But to get the infrastructure of that, to find the light designer, the choreographers, the musicians, the composers, the sound design, the set design, the production manager, the people that would give to make this happen for the organization and for the children, and it's preparing them for the stage of life. Why are you putting them on stage? It's the stage of life. It's a process of growing, and I guess it's just it's what I'm meant to do. And there's another book that's coming out. We've got the play, and the play, I mean, it's possible. You just stick with the joy of development.
Yeah, it's a constant battle that everybody is finding, being present in the experience and living in the moment, or am I doing this for something down the road for a satisfaction, and then finding that balance of work and purpose. That's the everyday struggle from every person that should have the awareness and trying to decide.
I'm very grateful where I am now, because whether I express it or not, or this podcast comes out, strong, I feel that I'm entering into this world of being the elder. And I talked with Miles about it. Now, Miles, I love Miles. Miles, and just like the book says, these guys met, they were lifelong friends the day they met. And that's true. And it's been a long time. And it's the being the elder. And it's taking that pause between stimulus and response as an elder. I mean, I'm seeing it. It's happening naturally, where things or someone says something that is just radical or something, and not reacting, but seeing it's a different vision. And we want, Miles and I know Miles is younger, but that's where I want to exercise that, and to bring a level of knowledge, and you can too do it to anything and everything. I look at Ross Edgley, who swam around the United Kingdom, and I go, brother, 6 hours on, 6 hours off for 5.5 months, swimming. I'm a swimmer. And so when I go, oh, this hurts, it's like, shut up your head. David Goggins, You Can't Hurt Me, his first book. You just go, this is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I would like a disclaimer that David Goggins is on another level of mental state than most people. I don't know if anybody could quite be like David Goggins.
No, and now he's a smoke jumper at 40 some odds, in Montana. And it's like, dude, and others. But Lawrence brought that to me. And George Mallory also. George Mallory, Everest. George Mallory, it was 100 years ago, June, that he did his last attempt, and he and his climbing partner, Sandy Irving, were lost. They never came back. 1999, Conrad Anker found his body on Everest, George Mallory's. What they're looking for is a camera, a Kodak camera, of course Kodak camera, that Kodak says they would still be able to develop to see if they actually made it to the top of Everest before Hillary, like years before Hillary. And so that's been a conjecture. It was like 2 weeks ago, Jimmy Chin, who is another icon of mine, who does all these incredible movies. He's the one that films Alex Honnold doing Solo, up Yosemite. But he found Irving's boot with his foot still in it 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So another piece of the puzzle of on Everest at the end of a glacier. It was sitting there. And the name tag on it, it was said, Irving. And so they've done DNA on it. And in fact, it's Sandy Irving. So they're trying to figure out that. So I'm just speaking of icons and people that I've looked forward to, because as a young man, I said, I'm not interested in reading. I was like, stupid. I'm not interested in reading. I want to do it. You should read Call of the Wild, or Call to the Wild, Jack London's book. I'm going, I don't need to read that book. I'm gonna go and do it. And that was, my radicalness. But
Can you, for the people who are listening, can you provide additional context in your understanding of who T.E. Lawrence is, what he did, and why is his name known today?
well, I mean, working backwards, he was the British conduit that worked with Emir Faisal. He found Emir Faisal and kind of tagged him as the leader. He was the son of Hussein, who was the Emir of Mecca, who was the leader of the Arabs. And they all wanted Arab independence from the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. Let me go back. Lawrence at 17 did a just under 2,500-mile bicycle ride through France at 17 because he wanted to see Crusader castles. And he did have a family friend go with him, like a chaperone, but he did that. Prior to that, he was going to building sites in Oxford, where he lived, in London, any place that was torn up, and finding shards of old antique pottery, and then taking it to the Ashmolean Museum. The head of the Ashmolean Museum watched this kid, was recognized this kid had a lot of interest in old things, and he eventually set him up to go to the Middle East, to Syria, to work on an archaeological dig that Lawrence took on. And so Lawrence learned Arabic and learned the culture of the people and became very knowledgeable. And ultimately, the war breaking out, the man at the Ashmolean Museum's name is David Hogarth, who was the head of the Arab Bureau, which was stationed in Cairo at the Cairo Intelligence, and they were set up to watch the Turks, to keep the activities of the Turks and the Germans during the war clear, with the war offices and the foreign offices in London. Lawrence was a part of that because he was the only one, British guy, that could speak Arabic. And he had worked for several summers in Carchemish on this archaeological dig, in his early 20s. So he was commissioned. He was a part of, not necessarily the upper echelon liked him. Anyone his rank or lower, I mean, they couldn't figure him out because he was so quirky. But anyway, before he went to, was a part of the Arab Bureau, before he was recognized, anything in the military, he did a solo walk to Lebanon, Syria, and he ended up going to Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, and ended up going to Israel on his own, a 1,000-mile walk, sketching and writing notes about Crusader castles, because he had a thesis that he was working on of the influence of Crusades on the military architecture, which, sounds boring. He won a first, he got great notoriety, and from that, he ended up getting to the Arab Bureau through Hogarth and becoming a part of the intelligence community in the Middle East. So he was assigned to go with several others to offer a bribe to the Turks, who were holding siege over 13,000 soldiers and Indian soldiers, British and Indian soldiers, in a place called Kut. And they started with £1 million to offer this Turkish commander that was gloating over having all these soldiers boxed in, and they were starving. Inside, they were starving, and the attrition was high. They offered him $2 million, and he said no. But ultimately, at the same time, there were agreements being made, and Lawrence realized that someone has to, you know, run the Arab revolt from the Arab side. And so he ended up meeting Faisal, who was the son of Hussein. Hussein was in correspondence with a man that was trying to get the Arabs to stand up with the Allies and fight against the Turks and the Arabs. At the same time, Lawrence was talking to Faisal. And so they all joined forces and the war went on. And the goal was to get, for the Arabs, in order to have independence, was to get to Damascus first. And that's kind of in the movie from Lawrence of Arabia. And the fact is that there were secret agreements being made during the time of the war that established who was going to get what, even before the end of the war. And at the Paris Peace Conference, Lawrence, Faisal, and Gertrude Bell fought this and tried to reason that the Arabs needed their independence. And the word was, no, we already have an agreement. The French are going to get Syria, which they were happy, because the British said, what do you want? This is before the war ended. If the war ends, what do you want in the Middle East? And the French said, we want Syria. They said, great, we'll support that. And the French said, well, what do you want? Well, we'll just take this little area over here, Basra, you know, and we will be the protectorates of the land. That's the way we'll send it off. And then we'll present it. And then perhaps we'll form mandates that define how we're there to help the people establish themselves. But behind it was oil. It was all about oil for the British. The French had no clue that that's what was on the British mind. So Lawrence had encouraged Faisal to fight for his independence. And he said that the British government was supporting that. We get to Damascus first, we win. But the secret agreements became known. It just made Lawrence look like a fool. And he said, still, if we get to Damascus, they can't refuse us. And Lawrence did everything that he could. It was all guerrilla warfare. It was blowing up trains, as you see in the movie, because it was an in and out without anybody knowing what was going on. No one wore uniforms, much like in Palestine today. And in Gaza, no one wears a uniform there, you know. And so the Israelis wear uniforms, and they don't know who they're shooting at, so they shoot them all, you know. And as far as when Lawrence was doing the blowing up of the trains, it was, you know, interrupt the supply lines and disrupt things and just make it harder for the Turks to move around, to keep control. And they did that all the way up into Damascus. His role, he was honored because he could ride as much as any Bedouin. He was a warrior in his own right, and he had great respect. And they called him, he was the king of the desert in his own way.
Yeah, my gosh, there's so many different directions we could go from this point. The history.
I know.
You wanted to read an excerpt from the book. Is this an okay time to read a section from the book that you have prepared?
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to read our meeting with His Royal Highness Prince Khalid, because it was the underpinning when we went on the trek to what we found to be true there. And I'll just start. This is from the book, from chapter 5. Shall I just begin?
Yes, sir.
And just like that, they were arriving at His Royal Highness Prince Khalid's Jeddah Palace with Osama and Al-Mutaim. It was a stark, unexpected contrast to their earlier encounter on the trash-ridden street of Al-Balad Souk. Jeddah, Jahani, the true gatekeeper, greeted him inside the palace with a demeanor that was both kind and direct. He was a refreshing change. His English was very good. With a polite but firm gesture, he ushered Al-Mutaim away, guiding the gentleman into a grand room where 50 sheikhs sat in chairs lined against the long wall, awaiting audience for His Royal Highness Prince Khalid. This was the monthly majlis with the prince, a kind of standing meeting, except sitting. The sheikhs looked like biblical figures from central casting, headdress of thick keffiyeh and heavy cord agals, long dark or gray beards, and multiple layers of wool and camel's hair wraps around their large girths held with wide belts. Some held tall weathered staffs, and all wore thick leather sandals, their feet spread wide apart, firmly on the floor. As the Royal Highness Prince Khalid entered, the atmosphere turned reverent. He was considered tall for an Arabian man at about 6 feet, with an aquiline nose, pursed lips, and perfectly trimmed beard, like so many of his Saudi royal predecessors. His eyes were steely blue but kind and inquiring. His thobe was cream-colored with gold trim, spotless. His role was significant. As one of the highest-ranking princes in Saudi Arabia, as governor of Mecca province, he was the custodian of the two holy mosques of Mecca and Medina that drew millions of Muslims on pilgrimage each year. Prince Khalid sat in a chair at the end of the room in front of the sheikhs. He moved and listened with a calm air of authority as sheikhs, one at a time, spoke of news from their region. Finn and Magnus sat opposite these camel owners, the Bedouin eyes of the desert. The prince quietly acknowledged the reports from sheikhs about their observations of the recent annual Hajj religious pilgrimage to Mecca. Magnus and Finn, with no fluency in Arabic as yet, could only surmise it was a successful period for the nodding heads as reports from each sheikh about their latest insights on the recent Hajj annual religious pilgrimage to Mecca was delivered. Despite the fact that they were Westerner, dressed with long khaki travel pants and collared travel shirts, they were not looked down upon as they may have been if meeting with royalty in England. Jahani suddenly turned to Finn and pointed to Magnus, sitting with his legs crossed, and wagged his finger for a different reason. La, no. Finn leaned in and whispered to Magnus, uncross your legs, Max. What? Uncross your legs. They looked across the room at the sheikhs who were staring at them. Okay, different customs. Osama leaned in from behind them and smiled. Here in Saudi, we eat with our right hand and don't cross our legs. Copy that. In America, when we're nursing a wound of 20 stitches, we sit however we can, Magnus muttered. The majlis over, the prince stood while his guards and a couple of sheikhs surrounded him. Al-Jahani guided Magnus and Finn through a door to the outside misty, foggy evening when his Royal Highness and his entourage walked toward them. Stepping aside for him to pass, he stopped alongside Magnus and Finn. Thank you for being here, Mr. Magnus and Mr. Finn. The prince addressed them directly, looking with gentle eyes into theirs. I invite you to join me for dinner. You will see that we are not all terrorists. So that's the way people were talking. And there was a level of suffering, actually, with some that we met in saying, I am so sorry for what happened in 9/11. That is not us. We don't know how we're going to be seen by Americans. We can't go there. No one wants to come here. We're hated. And we don't know how long this will last. And that's what we ran into. You're American? You American? Why are you here? And so we were there to get a better understanding. And we found out the commonalities, really. I mean, the expression from the prince, and it was true. We went to dinner and he ended up saying why we were there, and all the sheikhs acknowledged in their form of approval that these two Americans were here to go through the desert to see for themselves how they lived and who they were beyond the headlines, Western headlines. So it was an eye opener.
I can't imagine the impression that that experience put on you and Miles. I have to assume that that was a. I don't even know how to explain it.
It was authentic, and that was the
Yeah.
first thing. Was like, is this authentic? And it was so authentic because in the Middle East, it's particularly in Saudi, it's quiet. There's no, loud voices. There's no swearing, no cussing. The first time, I mean, I had something in my mouth, and I'm not a spitter, but I spat on the ground, and my interpreter, later on we were producing a very large event in Saudi, uh, a year and a half later, he said, "No, Tad, not spit, never spit on ground. Very bad, very bad." And then in producing this event, there were some very upset Lebanese, and they they said in a meeting, "This is fucking insane." That was it. They were released, and they were Red Bull. It was a Red Bull group. It was the Red Bull group that we brought in for this 8-day sea festival, and I said, why are they leaving? They said, very bad man. And it's because he was angry and he said the word. And it's like, okay. And so when people spoke, and my interpreter said very early on, he said, Tad, my name has always been Tad. My mother named me Tad as a nickname, but my name is Wellington, and I go by Wells, but she liked Tad. So I used it as an acting name. On IMDb, I'm Tad Jones. But my writing name and what people call me is, it's crazy, Wells. But he said, Tad, when you say hello to someone, look them directly in the eyes and use lower voice. Assalamu alaikum. Oh. He said, but always look, because they have to answer you. No matter who they are. If they're Muslim, they have to answer, wa alaikum assalam. May God of peace be with you, and it's returned. And it is not a throwaway thing. It's not, hey, how you doing, man? Assalamu alaikum. It's like, no, assalamu alaikum. And it's like Jamie, our SAS trainer, said, the one thing that will get you the furthest in any country I have found, and this is what I tell my people, graciousness, being gracious, always have the smile ready. And that's seen as good, but to be stern is not good. Just to be open, So.
Yeah, intention. It sounds like your word is taken very seriously, and everybody speaks with intention. There's not throwaway lines of passiveness. It's if I'm going to use my voice, it's of authority or seriousness, and we want everybody to take it seriously.
Right. It's not a tool to entertain, to be funny, or to tell a joke or a dirty joke, for sure. No. And just speaking of culture, it was really wild. And it never occurred to me, we haven't seen any women, any females at all. In Jeddah, we were allowed to go into the mall, but everything is separated from, singles, which are men, and family, which are men with family. But if you're single, you cannot get around the corner to see females. And that's just the way it is. That's the way it was in 2006. And yet, working like females in their offices when they had their headdress off and were working international business, they said the women aren't revolting against being Muslim and being in the house. They control everything still. The men may be out and they may not be able to drive, they may certain things, but they get what they want. And underneath the keffiyeh, their hair is streaked. They wear I Love New York t-shirts, and they cut off shorts, and they have swimming pools, but they don't display, themselves at all.
With you being there and experiencing this firsthand, and also having a Westerner's experience and mindset as well, how do you feel about that now? Are you open-minded to it? Do you still feel like there's legitimate criticism to be had on some of those cultural norms in the Middle East, or how do you personally feel about some of these differences between the Middle East and Western culture?
They'll work it out, whatever it is. I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
I find that cultures are different, but the commonalities are bigger.
Yeah.
And the actual expression of things, that's part of the difference. It's just, and it's in our own country. There are things in the South you don't do in the North.
For sure.
It's like, where are you from? Cincinnati? Where are you from? Nashville? Or are you from, whatever? And it's like, it's just a difference. If I hear someone saying, this has got to stop, I listen, want to know what's behind their thought. While we were there, 7 women did get in cars and drove. It was a huge thing. It's in the book. They drove in the parking lot of a supermarket. They told their drivers, because they all have male drivers. They're like from Mongolia. And I mean, they're very unusual people in some cases, that are the driver for the household, and they were reprimanded, but they did it, and it was like a big deal. But I believe now there are women driving, actually.
Yeah.
Since then.
Yeah, it's morality and culture. It's a difficult conversation. Who's to judge? It's with what we've discussed and what you brought about history. There's a long past that has led us to where we are today in every circumstance.
Right.
Stuff just doesn't come up out of the blue. So yeah, it brings you can have an interesting point or perspective, or unique point and perspective. But everything should be looked at with context. And your approach is you're looking at things with an understanding. You're not here to judge. We're here to understand. And the core premise of your book and your reason for justification for going to the Middle East, it's right there to understand.
Did you get as far to the postscript in the book, the little note that was found in the rucksack at the end, the 5 little things? Did you see that as well?
Actually, yeah, that was my plan for ending the podcast.
There you go.
was putting
Good
those
man.
5
Are we
points
at that point?
Yeah.
Are we at that point?
There's a few more things. Is that okay?
Please. Oh, yeah.
I actually had a small excerpt from the book too.
Good.
That I'm going to read to you, and then I'm going to have a follow-up 2 questions on it, okay? So in regard to the Saudi desert, your character Finn said, "There is a timeless quality about this place. You can feel a sense of history embedded in the sands and stones, just as Lawrence spoke of the desert. It's clean, it's purity, it's magic." Can you elaborate on what it was like for you to gain this awareness or perspective? And from your path through the Middle East, did you truly find a solace or a love for that land to learn to appreciate and see the majestic beauty of the desert and everything?
Completely. I wrote that. Yeah, completely. It's appreciation and a joy in having the appreciation, but being there and sensing time. There's so much time and history and thinking of the moon. I was humming the tune, when I first got on camel. When we took camels from Aqaba to, in the actual trek, Aqaba to through Wadi Rum. We were out for like 3 nights, 4 days, something like that. And it was being immersed in this free, peaceful, pure, unencumbered, unfiltered space with no sign of civilization. And yet civilization, stampeded through, battles were fought. And that sense of, in the movie Patton, I remember when he said, I can smell the battle. The General Patton. And it's just, there's something, I'm sure, maybe going to Gettysburg and going to places like that, but a sense of history. And then the quiet. I got that in Antarctica. The quiet where if there's no wind and you're just lying down in the shade in Saudi or in Jordan, you can hear your heartbeat. It's that quiet. And the first time I heard that in Antarctica was in the dry valleys. And it was just so quiet. And all it was a painting. Everything was just this, like sitting in a painting of silence, but it was so beautiful. That's the way I felt. The way the light reflected off the sides of the mountain, of the rock faces, looked like melted wax. Once in a while a bird would fly off, and you just listen to it echo and then disappear. Peace, solitude. Is there a God? And you say it's here, and you can go to Jeddah, you can go to New York City, you can go to London, you can go to Tokyo, you can go to San Francisco, LA, these massive, cemented places. But to be there was just such a thrill and a blessing. Yeah. And it was fed because of the research. I was looking for it. Why? And it was never like questioning. It was just an overwhelming feeling of just, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
And it brought on a sense of awareness or meditation or mindfulness, and just being in that situation, taking a deep breath and understanding. Yeah, like you said, you come with your understanding from your history and research, and having that realization where you are and how heavy and impactful that is incredible.
It was, and it is. And I so admire, one, I do read a lot now. I didn't, but I so admire Lawrence, and then all of his motorcycle riding. I ride, I don't have a Brough, which is what he rode. He had about 8 of them, but I know exactly what he's talking about. And often in my BMW motorcycle magazines, they cite Lawrence. He's noted for, because of his accident, helmets became essential, in motorcycle riding. They weren't a safety feature, but it became very important. But that's that thrill of moving through space on a motorcycle, to me, fast. It's great. Skydiving is pretty awesome. By the way, Miles did his first jump. he trained and he jumped out at 13,000 feet. When I first jumped out, it was 3,500 feet. 13,000 feet. He had a helmet with communications with two. One was in front, the guy was in front of him, someone was behind him, and they guided him all the way through. But he did a free fall all on his own from 13,000 feet up for his first jump. And so he's getting into that, and we are using skydiving in the next book.
Awesome.
And it's shaping up, and it is, I will say, it is focused on Havana, Cuba. And we do have a time travel device that I don't know the listeners realize that there's a time travel device that's in the book that allows us to make it a historical fiction, but the history that's presented is very accurate. And so we plan to do that with the new year of the revolution in Havana, the lead up and so forth. But little teaser on that one.
Very cool. I'm excited.
Magnus and Finn go back to 1958, and they go back, and they're traveling from the present is 2016, when Cuba opened up. And Miles, I will say, has actually been there, and he's not invited back. So
wow.
There's a story, all of this, and it's good. It's all good. It's all legitimate, good. Another eye opener on maybe Westerners, white man's sense of power and hubris, and we see it in our own country. So Native Americans and so many.
The history isn't kind, and all we can do is learn.
And history repeating, which is
that was one of my questions. Is history doomed to repeat itself? What is your take on that statement?
Absolutely. It's still the upsetment of one group of people against another. It's been going on. It wasn't the Israelis or the Jewish, it was the Turks. And I'm not comparing them, Israeli and Turks, at all. But I'm saying Arabs have always been under attack. And the Israelis, who's the victim? I think we're dealing with victims of victims,
Yeah.
It's such a very rough thing to deal with. And Lawrence saw this coming, and he was concerned about it, about the warring that will come out of this. And it certainly has. And it's a level of history repeating, definitely.
Yeah. Hopefully, maybe there's a little optimism in me if society and people can grow enough to get a better understanding and exploration of other parts of the world and different cultures and people, that if we can get to a ultimate understanding, or at least a compassionate understanding, that maybe one day history will not be repeating itself on this
Yes.
what it seems to be an innate thing.
Yeah. Well, the one person I haven't talked about in the book, there are two young proteges. Jeremy is a Jewish kid, and Abdu, an Arab fellow, and they both met each other at Seeds of Hope, which, of course, I mentioned earlier is based on Seeds of Peace, and they brought context for us. Jeremy was a Jeremy, and Abdu is based on a couple of different people that we met, but they're instrumental in the story to give a view of today, more of today, and the confusion as young people as to what do we think, what do we do, how do we respond, what's responding, and then what's going too far, But the one person that brought Lawrence to the forefront was Lowell Thomas, a journalist from the Chicago Tribune that was hired by the newspaper to get over to France and to give us give the American people any reason to be involved in the war, something good that's happening at the war front. And he could find nothing but just the terror that was happening in the decimation by the Germans of the French on the front. And then he heard something about this sideshow that was going on in the Middle East. And it's like, what are they doing over there? Well, they're trying to protect the Suez Canal, and they're trying to stop the Germans from building a railroad across, the Middle East to get to Basra, to the port that would, we would lose our control of India and blah, blah, blah. And so he decided to go there. And the first thing that he went there to film Allenby walking into Jerusalem and freeing Jerusalem from the Turks. And there was headline news, and he covered it. And he saw this unusual short guy, that 5'5" again, it wasn't Peter O'Toole, in Arab dress. And he's going, who is that? With blue eyes. And he looked like, wait a minute, what is this? And they said, oh, that's the quirky, Lawrence. And he's, the king of the desert. And he said, I want to meet him. What's he do? Well, he's been working with Faisal, the son of King Hussein. And Thomas is going, oh, yeah. I mean, today I was going, yeah, I want to meet this guy. Can I read that section?
For sure. Yes, 100%.
Okay. So this is a time in the book where Magnus and Finn have used the dagger, or the cryptex, which is their time travel device, and they've gone back to Aqaba, to this period when T.E. Lawrence is introduced and meets Lowell Thomas. And Lowell Thomas wants to take him out into the desert and get shots of him in the desert so that he can use it as part of his story. Now, his story, Lowell Thomas's story, becomes Lawrence on Arabia, which is one of a massive show. There was a slideshow put to music of Allenby in Palestine and Lawrence in Arabia. And people kind of liked Allenby, but they loved the Lawrence story, this Westerner wearing, Bedouin kit and Arab clothing in the desert, fighting in the war. He became a rock star through Lowell Thomas. He did shows at Madison Square Garden, sold out in New York. And then he came across to England and did shows in England. And it was all about this waif-like figure, Lawrence. So Magnus and Finn have put themselves back in time to where Lowell Thomas is with T.E. Lawrence in the desert, above the sea. Now they're in Aqaba. They're above the Gulf of Aqaba. Aqaba, a few years before, was the fort was taken by Lawrence and tribes of the Arab Revolt, which was the first big win that turned the tide against the Turks and the Germans for the Arab Revolt. And Lawrence was instrumental in that concept and doing it. So this is Lowell Thomas a couple of years later with Lawrence. And Magnus and Finn are eavesdropping on this conversation. Above the sea, on a promontory surrounding the bay, stood Lowell Thomas, an American journalist and adventurer whose reputation for storytelling became as vast as the global landscapes he traversed. It was February 1918, and Magnus and Finn had jumped directly to that day in Aqaba instead of returning to the present. Knowing for his intrepid reporting from the trenches of World War I to the far-flung corners of the globe, Thomas had a knack for uncovering stories delivered in a program that captivated audiences. His commitment to bringing the world's most compelling narratives to life had made him a respected figure in journalism. Armed with his camera and an unquenchable thirst for the next great story, Thomas had been filming Allenby's capture of Jerusalem when Sir Ronald Storrs, the British military governor of Jerusalem, presented him to the blue-eyed, intense, waif-like figure in Arab garb Thomas had heard rumors about. Sir Ronald introduced Major Lawrence as the uncrowned king of Arabia. Thomas took his first pictures of Lawrence outside that office. The Lawrence legend rapidly grew amidst the tumult of war and political intrigue. It was in the remote, harsh environment of Aqaba that Thomas would cement that legacy, turning the lens of history into a dynamic, real-life hero who would become an icon of the era. The sun beat down mercilessly on the arid landscape, tossing stark shadows that played along the contours of the sand dunes. Magnus and Finn observed that Thomas, with his cameraman, Harry Chase, was a figure of intense focus. He directed Chase to keep his camera rolling keenly on their new subject, a man who had become an enigma, a blend of military genius and a revered leader, indeed, the uncrowned king of the desert, Lawrence in Arabia.
I want to make sure that there's clarity with the listeners and somebody who will be seeking out the book following this conversation. To help provide some context geographically, can you explain your path in every location that you went to in your experience in the Middle East?
Well, the path was to follow Lawrence roughly, and it's going along the Red Sea coast, starting with Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and working our way up along the coast. We touch places, and it's in the book, Yambo, and getting to Aqaba, and discovering just before getting to Aqaba, discovering that Moses lived in one place right along the Red Sea coast in Maghar al-Shaib for a decade. And I'm going, wait a minute. And the guy that was telling us about this was talking like Musa and Ibrahim. And I was going, whoa, what are you talking about? Musa. And I'm saying, are you saying Moses? Hi, Iwa, Musa. And I'm going, prophet? Yes. Well, it's one of the things we discovered, that all three religions, Jewish and Muslim and Christian, share the same prophets. And so we followed the path of Lawrence, the big turnover in Aqaba and getting up through Amman and going through, we actually veered off course and went into Petra and wanted to see that city. And the goal for us, like Lawrence, was Damascus. So there were a number of little places along the way that are historically accurate to, and some of them are in the book, to Lawrence's journey to get to Damascus. Getting to Damascus was fabulous for us. It's just over 1,000 miles from Jeddah to get up to Damascus. And one of the first things we did is that we went to the Umayyad Mosque, because we had heard that John the Baptist's head was interned at the Umayyad Mosque. And it's like, how could that be? This is a Muslim country. And they said, oh no, we've got the head. And even the Pope had gone through a few years before to acknowledge that the head was inside this crypt inside the Umayyad Mosque. And then we did end up going further north into Homs, Syria, which is where the greatest, according to Lawrence, was the greatest preserved castle in the world. And it's called Crac de Chevalier. And we spent a day going through it and just imagining the clamoring of horses and the people in this Crusader castle, with it being alive with activity, protecting the surrounding Syrian area. Magnificent. It was fantastic.
Aside from, very clearly, it's it comes across that you appreciate this experience and your goal was met of finding an understanding and a connection with people on the other side of the world. Was there other takeaways that you learned from this experience that shape your life going forward?
It just broadened my understanding of people,
Yeah.
and different cultures and people that were, as you say, under the gun, or one could say that were being aimed at by us and others. And it's not, I hope it seems, we had one review on the book that said, I love the book, blah, blah, blah. It seems to be leaning very much one direction. I'm dissatisfied with that. And I think they're thinking we're leaning towards the Arabs. But we're not. We want to present as factual what we experienced and what we saw. And it's also based on history. And so to understand the people, you have to understand the history. And if you're willing, but many people do not want to adapt to that. They don't want to consider that. They're not curious about it. And the prejudices are held, like my electrician. You couldn't change them. And when you run into that, there's no need to try and convince someone otherwise. It's to be the example and come back and say what we're saying, that there are more commonalities than differences. And the extreme isms are the things that get the headlines, and people follow that. That's what gets the headlines, not how we can get along or how we're similar at all.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And conveying a message and language and communication it's difficult. And you can only tell a story from your lens, and I can only consume from my lens and my experience. And if those are at odds, and if I were to consume with not having that open mind, it's hard. But it's the same reason history is repeating itself, because it's difficult to get over some of those hurdles or those preconceptions that are ingrained.
I don't have time to deal with this.
Yeah.
I got the answer. I know exactly what's going on. And also with the social media and the speed of communication, it's just miscommunication.
Yeah.
It's just a louder voice winning. But that, harping on the differences doesn't define us.
Yeah. 100%.
That's it.
Just like to get towards the end of this, Wells, thank you. Your voice is one of many that is you're speaking with intention, and you're trying to bring awareness from your perspective, and I think that's all anybody can do. And you're looking at it with an open lens, and it's very clear you're trying to be appreciative, respectful, and understanding of everything, and that's all you can do. And if someone's critical of that, then all that you can hope is that one day they'll have a moment where they can create more openness for themselves and have an aha moment to be understanding as well.
Well, I read an article that came out on October 7th, and it was a South African journalist. And I thought it was wonderful because I got it because I have a Google search for T.E. Lawrence, that I get anything that comes up. He was talking about, there's been no time to grieve in the year of what happened on October 7th, that it's been continuous. I mean, for tears, it's just been, it's to have it over with. It's not over. And he called it, well, he couldn't figure out, like, what is it that drives a human being to retaliate, the retribution. When do you stop the anger? When is it sated? It's satisfied. And we see this time and again. We saw it with 9/11, the continuous bombing, killing, justification to eliminate, to go after. And even after getting, the leader or this or that, it's like not over. And when is it over? And he likened it to it happened to Lawrence when he said, the man who brings the most dead wins, no prisoners. And that was 50 miles before getting into Damascus. They'd come upon the Turks in a village of Tafas, and it was horrifying. Okay, take the concert and what you see on the ground, horrifying of how brutal the killings were. And it incensed Lawrence so much, and his warriors that were with him, that for 36 hours they did the same thing that the Turks were doing, but he did it to the Turks. And all the way up to Damascus, just continuous, unrelenting slaughter. It's like madness. And the writer of this article called it righteous indignation, where one side feels what has been done to them, that they have the right, and they have God, and they're chosen, and they are, the state is behind them, everyone's behind them, other people. I mean, look at what's going on now. And that we will continue. And I mean, the bombings have gone from Gaza to, Lebanon to, when is it going to stop?
Yeah.
Where does it stop? And I don't say that I say just that. That's all I'm talking about. I'm not judging. I'm saying it is death. It is brutal. And it's genocide.
Yeah. It's a very heavy topic, but it's an important one. That's because it's very relevant in our world, and it's not right to be ignorant of what's happening in the world either, because we can very being in America and living in the U.S. There's a lot of afforded privileges where we can pretend that things aren't happening because it's not in our backyard. It's a hard conversation, and sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's important to have that understanding that there's more going on, and there's always more to the story, and it takes time to get that understanding. So let's end on one lighter note for this conversation and bring it back to the story itself and kind of getting a little bit of an insight to your creative process. This was a co-authored book with Miles Spencer. Can you speak to a little bit of turning your experience into this story and also having a collaborative creative process for writing the book and joining along Miles with the Broadway play? What is that whole process like to you, and why co-author it? Why did you guys do this as a joint venture? Just a little bit of an insight to that.
Well, the joint venture on the book was because it was a joint venture on the journey, and we just seemed to have a complementary approach. I come with an acting background and performing and creative background. Miles comes from a entrepreneurial background, but a love of Lawrence and what we've been through. The writing, we've told the stories over and over again. There was never a glitch. It was just a release, something that we just had to get out. And we figured out an outline, a structure that allowed us to fill in the blanks. And we realized we did not want to do, because we've dealt with so many versions of the play, we had an insight onto kind of what works and what doesn't work, what becomes a view from, the upper floor watching things happen, or are we going to, how are we going to present it? Is it going to be nonfiction? And really, we felt nonfiction would be just boring. We wouldn't get the readers. And so we figured out historical fiction, if we could pull them in with with the history, for the history that's spot on, we can entertain them with the fiction that informs. And that was the idea. And we were both so tuned into that. And then writing, particularly the dialogue, it was just fantastic. And we did it all on Google Docs. And so we were just like suggestions, yes, no. But it was like, it was all yes. It was all yes. It was just go, go, go. And then having people read and going, no, 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 no. Not really. But we just, it was in us. And he's in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I'm in Santa Fe. And we just wrote. And we were able, and it's the same way with what we're doing with Havana. We're able, but the experiences we both shared, the experiences in Havana, I'm going to Havana. I will be going to Havana soon. I mean, there's a lot of issues going on right now. But my lady and I are going to go together and to see firsthand. I've just done a lot of research, which I love. As I said before, this is one of the things I love about performing and doing anything that's a presentation, is to have the knowledge of what it is you're doing to present it,
Yeah.
And so creatively, we know that there are some glitches in the book, and maybe after we've got 300 some odd American reviews, 150 some odd European, other area reviews. After we get 500 reviews, we'll do another edition of A Line in the Sand and release it. But we're pleased, and we're not beating ourselves up for anything that's lacking. And there are things that are to us, but just going with it. And we're pleased to have done something like that.
Yeah.
And we hope, and according to the response, yeah, it's hitting marks. We want to sell books, because if we sell more books, we can do more. I could do more in life.
Yeah.
And it's not like we wrote it to make money, but I have such respect for the people that, hit the New York Times bestsellers, Goggins. I mean, many different people that have been kind of rogue type people that have done something of value. And they're on the Washington Speakers Bureau and making like Roku bucks, speaking, coming in and talking about their experience. But and that's not something we're envisioning, but it is a level of respect for what it takes to produce the product.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Miles and I work great together. It's a team, but we've done hundreds of thousands of flight miles together, with Money Hunt and traveling and venture capital conference. And we've just been bros, tight, and we know when to go, it's just natural. It's natural.
Yeah. And to write this book together, it sounds like it was just natural. That was the only option.
Natural. I mean, it was written so quickly that it was very good. And also the advice we had, we can't help it, and the acknowledgement to the people is legitimate.
Yeah.
Because it's just not one person doing it and it's done. It's like there's a number of people involved.
Beautiful. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you have the fortune of it's out in the world, right? That's part of the creative process. You can collaborate, you experience, you collaborate, you write, and at some point you say, this is getting shared with the world.
We'll see. It's just now. I think the first one, Miles had a leg up on this. I was involved in other things. I couldn't get onto the podcast stuff, but we've only been doing this for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Or I guess 4 weeks with Miles, but it's been, we've got a team that knows how to reach out, and that's producing you. And it's great. So we'll see how it's received.
And I appreciate you reaching out and having this conversation. It's been insanely fun. It's opened my eyes. I was fortunate enough to go down some rabbit holes and learn more as well.
So cool.
That's all that I can ask for. And
that's great. Oh, inspired. That's cool. That's great. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Really good. So you like this note at the end of the book, because that's what it gets down to.
Yes,
you want to take it from here?
No. One more thing, and then and then I don't want to steal your thunder. I'll let you.
No, there's no thunder. There's no.
It's your book. I don't need to read the closing page. But just as a lighthearted thing before we get to the 5 points, a quick game. Can I ask you to play? Can you provide 2 truths and a lie?
I can't. No, I never created one.
No,
really, I never did. That is a really cool question. You know what? I'm going to have to come back on that one because it was Miles's idea. I think it's a brilliant idea, and we did that for the book. Okay. We had other games we played. I think he played it once or twice. Miles is very much into games and that kind of thing to bring people in together. Yeah. But did you like that? Oh
yeah, I very much enjoyed that.
Yeah,
that part of the story. It stuck out to me of when it happened a couple times throughout, and it just had me thinking, about my personal life and how I would, if I were in that situation.
Tell me one. Do you have one?
But that was the thing. I didn't come with one prepared because
in all this time I have not. I like, people seem to love it so much. I set them up for them to get the butt up bump. As Osama says, 1, I've been married 3 times. 2, just met a prince. And 3, what it was, and you were Magnus and Finn. We were going, yeah, okay. You just met the prince. No, he said, no, I've got 4 wives. It's just crazy. But anyway,
we'll leave that one on the table, Wells.
Yeah,
thank you. It was fun. And the closing statement, please. I would like to hear and share the 5 points that were shared at the end of the book.
Well, it's a note that was found in the bottom of the rucksack. Read the book, you'll see what the rucksack's all about. But it was a note that apparently it's T.E. Lawrence's rucksack. We've determined that for sure. And so we feel that this is something that he has typed out. The date's very important because that date is the date of the play that we're producing.
Oh, okay.
And the play takes place at the Hotel Majestic on 19 February 1919. So down the line, it will have meaning. But anyway, it's what he has come up with, and it's what we came up with about what we've learned on this journey through the Middle East, through Lawrence. So it's Hotel Majestic. It's a note typed 19 February 1919. 1, humanity has more commonality than difference. 2, people have to live somewhere. 3, extermination is not legal. 4, retribution never evens the score. 5, my favorite, grandmothers deserve to know and love their offspring. And that's what we've come up with.
Beautiful.
Long live a full life, everyone.
Thank you, Wells. This is incredible, and we'll leave it open-ended for everybody to ponder these 5 thoughts and how they can apply that to their own life.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Jake. Many thanks, Jake. Great pleasure. We'll be in touch.
Yes, for sure.